The Adventures of Harry Nile.
I'm trying to reach Harry Nile.
You got him.
The private investigator?
Yes, sir. Who am I speaking to?
Gonna be in your office for a while this morning?
Yeah, I guess so. We're located in the...
I know where you're located. I'll be parked outside in 20 minutes. We'll talk in my car.
Hey, wait a minute. Who is this?
My name is Amos Burnside, and I want you to forget you ever heard it. And you might earn yourself a nice, fat commission. Capiche? Mr. Nile Letty?
How does he know my christened name? The name I gave up 15 years ago to protect my family when I went with the Chicago PD. And is this the same Amos Burnside who's a big-time stockbroker on Wall Street? And if he is, what's he doing calling a small-time private detective in Seattle? And why do I have to meet him in his car? And why is it that I've already developed a strong dislike for someone who wants to pay me a nice, fat commission?
The winter rains of 1952 are falling. Harry Nile rubs a circle in his steamy office window and looks out over the silver-gray scene. There's the familiar spike of the Smith Tower jutting its steeple into the overcast. Below, on the sidewalks, people hurry with wet umbrellas. Everything normal, everyone going somewhere, everyone knowing what they're going to do. But in the uncertain life of a private detective, the next case may be just like a dozen others, or it may be unlike anything that ever happened before. In 1 minute, Harry returns in the case called Harry and the Homework. And now, the adventures of Harry Nile.
You keep looking at your watch.
Yeah.
It's something about that phone call, isn't it?
Now, don't be asking me about the phone call, Murphy, because there's nothing to tell you. Yet.
Harry, I think you're nervous.
I'm not nervous.
3 times now you patted your shirt pocket.
So?
Well, you gave up cigarettes a long time ago.
Any coffee left?
No. You drink too much coffee anyway. What are you looking for down in the street?
Murphy, I'll tell you what. There's going to be a car pulling up in front in a couple of minutes, and I'm going to be out there waiting for it. Now, if I get in the car and it drives away, see if you can spot the license number, okay? Get a description of it?
Sure, but...
Just hang on to it. See you later, Murphy.
Harry Nile, I presume?
Mr. Burnside?
All right, come on. Get in out of the rain.
Nice meeting you, Mr. Burnside. I've read about you.
All of it highly complimentary, I'm sure. You know, this country has contempt for only 2 classes of people. The very poor and the very rich.
Well, I don't know if I'd agree that the country has...
Doesn't matter whether you agree. Let's drop the philosophizing. I'll tell you what I want. I want you to find out all the dirty secrets about the man my daughter wants to marry.
Oh.
Or is that beneath your dignity?
You want to keep her from marrying the guy?
She's a woman 40 years old. She can marry anyone she wants. I just want her to know what she's getting into. Save her some heartache down the road. Didn't you read that I am also a doting father?
Okay. Name of your daughter?
Marietta.
She live around here?
The other end of town. Now, I've got all that information in this folder that I made up for you here.
Well, what about the guy she wants to marry?
He's in there, too. His name is George Prentice. She met him this past summer in Mexico. Says he's a publisher of family histories, genealogy, that kind of thing. Now he's just moved here to Seattle where he can put the finishing touches on his con job.
And you think that...
He doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Let me lay it out for you, Harry. By researching what to buy and when to buy and sell it, I've made a lot of people rich, made myself rich. By doing so, I also made myself a target for every enterprising con man on the continent. So I've had to apply the same talent that makes me money to picking out the crooks trying to separate me from it. You follow?
Yeah, perfectly. So you did a little research on me, too, huh?
You mean the name thing. You sore about that?
No.
Have to know who I'm dealing with. What do I care if you changed your name, so long as you're not a fugitive? But I can't be out here on the coast playing detective, so I'm hiring you to get the goods on Prentice. I want daily reports. Reports to me in New York. I'll take it from there. I'll pay you $100 up front, $100 a day, and $300 bonus if you can find something that he could be convicted on. I don't even care if you set him up.
Harry, you're back. I was worried. I had visions of the mob taking you for a ride to rub you out.
No, this was the snob instead of the mob. Here, deposit this in the account, will you?
Ooh, okay. What's in the folder?
Well, we're going to dig into the life and times of George Prentice and the Prentice Heritage Press.
Sorry for the mess. I'm still moving the office in. Here, let me put this box on the floor so you can sit on the chair. There we go. Have a seat, please.
Oh, thanks.
And welcome to the Prentice Heritage Press. I'm George Prentice.
Harry Nile.
How can I help you?
Well, I've come across some records of my ancestors. I thought I'd get them compiled. Make a book of them or something.
Great, that's just what we do. But tell me, how did you find me? I mean, I haven't even really opened my doors for business yet.
Oh, someone just mentioned you were new in town looking for customers. Where'd you move from, by the way?
Hartford, Connecticut.
Connecticut? Brought you out here?
Well, you see, a rather impractical reason, I suppose you'd say. I met this wonderful woman last summer when I was vacationing down in Mexico. She lives here in Seattle, and so, well, I guess it was just one of those things.
Just one of those crazy flings, huh? I think that's the way the song goes, huh?
Oh, this isn't a fling. This is real.
Sounds very romantic. So you just up and moved your whole business clear across the country?
I know, yeah. It sounds insane, doesn't it? Leave the only town I've ever lived in all my life. But I guess you never know how far someone will go for love.
True. Love and money. Powerful motivators.
Yes, well, enough about me. Let's talk about this wonderful book that you want me to publish.
I've got to make my reason for being there sound real, so I invent a bunch of stories about this relative and that relative, and he's taking notes like mad, and I'm making mental notes. He talks like he knows a lot about the publishing business and like he really intends to make a go of it. In fact, if I weren't investigating him, I'd kind of like him.
Well, it sounds like you have a rich heritage, Mr. Nile. It'll be a pleasure to help you collect it all into a book, something that you and your descendants will be proud of. You have kids?
No. As a matter of fact, I'm not even married.
Oh, I see.
So when are you and the young lady going to tie the knot?
Marietta?
Huh.
Well, we don't know at the moment. You see, there's a little problem. Well, I don't need to concern you with it.
Oh, what's the little problem?
Well, it's her father. He's quite wealthy, and naturally he's very protective of his daughter.
And he thinks you're marrying her for her money, huh?
In a nutshell, yes.
What does she think?
What does she think? Well, I think she'd live in a hovel if it meant living with a man she loves. I'm a very, very lucky man, Mr. Nile.
Well, what about you? You weren't the least little bit influenced by her fortune?
I knew I loved her before I knew a thing about her. But, I think we kind of gotten off the track. You came here to get a book published, and that's how I make my living, by publishing books, not marrying into a fortune.
We shake hands, and I promise to bring him the stuff from my old family archives in a couple of days, which gives me time to start building an archive of my own on George Prentice. 2 days later...
Well, so far I found out there's no record of any George Prentice owning a publishing company in Hartford.
No surprise.
And I did like you said and called the Hartford City Treasurer. And he says there's no record of any George Prentice having a business license or paying business taxes.
No surprises there either.
So how did you do?
Well, I dropped in on the little shop Prentice rented in the U District, and I located the place where he's staying. Landlord tells me he wrote his deposit check on a bank in Washington, D.C. He'd bank in the capital if he lived in Connecticut.
But not impossible. I mean, he could have a relative in Washington, D.C. who's bankrolling him.
Yeah, it's possible. Murphy could be right. George Prentice could be just as legitimate as he seems to be. I see my $300 bonus flying out the window if Prentice turns out to be clean. But I keep on the routine things. I've got a buddy down at the phone company. He gives me 30 seconds of the long-distance records on George Prentice's phone since he moved to town. And guess what? Except for several local calls, Prentice has been calling various numbers in New York City, and every day to one number in Washington, D.C., and every night to a number in Maryland. But not a single call to Hartford. Building a case against George Prentice is going nowhere unless I can find proof that he's after Amos Burnside's fortune. And it's a cinch Prentice wouldn't leave evidence lying around his office. So I put Murphy back on the phone to see who he's calling in Washington, Maryland, and New York. But before she can start calling, there's a call for me. From Burnside himself.
Nile, what the devil are you doing out there? I've heard nothing from you since I handed you my case.
There's nothing to report yet, Mr. Burnside.
What have you been doing?
Well, I met George Prentice. I'm checking him out. He claims he's from Hartford, Connecticut, but he makes phone calls back to New York and Washington, D.C. and Maryland every day, and he's writing checks on a bank in the District of Columbia.
So what? You call that checking him out? My Lord, man, I could do that from my desk. I've got a telephone, too.
Listen, Mr. Burnside...
No, you listen. You know, in the stock brokerage game, we've got a little scam called churning. It's where a securities broker takes a client's portfolio and he buys and sells stock as often as he can get away with it. And naturally charging for every transaction, whether it's benefiting the poor sucker or not.
If that's what you think I'm doing to you, Mr. Burnside, you better get yourself another investigator.
I want to see some action out of you. Or the first thing you know, Marietta will elope with this guy.
Hey, if I push Prentice too much and he's guilty like you think he is, he'll just cut and run. Huh? Maybe that'd be a good idea at that. Listen, say I confront him. Tell him that you know what he's up to. Tell him that I'm working for you. And if he knows we're on to him, he'll blow town like the midnight choo-choo.
And what if he takes Marietta with him?
You got a point.
Under no circumstances, you hear me? Under no circumstances are you to let Prentice know what you're doing or who you're doing it for, who you're working for. You understand? You got that?
Listen, Mr. Burnside, right now my associate is trying to find out who he's calling back east. And I'm trying to find a connection between Prentice and you.
What are you talking about? There is no connection between Prentice and me.
If he's after your money, he's done his homework on you. If I can find that homework, you can take it to Marietta.
Oh, no. I'm not taking anything to Marietta. When you get the goods on Prentice, you're going to show it to Marietta.
Why me? She doesn't know me from a bowl of Wheaties.
Just take my word now. Marietta won't give me the time of day, let alone believe anything I tell her.
By now it's 4 o'clock in Seattle, and 7 at night in the east, but Murphy hits the phone while I head to the U District and shadow Prentice. 5 o'clock, he locks up his office, gets in his car and drives home, where he showers and emerges half an hour later wearing a suit. I tail him to where Marietta lives. I've got a break. He's spending the evening out of his house, which means I'll be spending it in his house. First, I call Murphy back at the office.
Harry, I just got off the phone to Maryland. You know that phone number he was calling every night? Do you know who he was calling? His wife. George Prentice has a wife.
I have to admit, this is one investigation where I hope the guy I'm casing is innocent. Burnside was right. Prentice is a phony. So, I hurry back to the Prentice apartment. I get out the trusty scalpel and operate on the back door. And I'm in. One sweep of the flashlight tells me George Prentice keeps his quarters so neat he could pass a Marine Corps inspection. Looks hardly lived in. His telephone's on a long cord, sitting on the table in the breakfast nook, and stacked neatly on the table beside it is what I'm looking for. In neat folders, pages clipped from the Wall Street Journal, stock reports, notes in pencil on lined paper, notes about the securities with big numbers, names, phone numbers. And here's the homework on Amos Burnside, the proof that George Prentice is at least as interested in Burnside's money as he is in his daughter. I get out my notebook and I start copying names and phone numbers as fast as I can, and then when I'm almost finished, it's Prentice. He's bringing Marietta back to his place. I back into the kitchen. There's a door to the back porch, and I pull it open. I stand behind it. Where I'm hiding, I can hear everything, but I can't see anything. Oh, why aren't they turning on the lights? Why aren't they talking? And now I hear him at the breakfast table. He's taking the evidence. I can't let him get away with it. Okay, Mr. Prentice, I think you better just leave those papers. You're not Prentice.
You clumsy clod, take that light out of my face.
Burnside, what are you doing here? I thought you were in New York.
Yeah, I would be if I hadn't hired a numbskull for a detective. Here, Right here's the proof I need that Prentice is a con artist.
Yeah, that's what I came for. Wait a minute, how'd you get in?
Ever hear of a key?
How'd you get a key?
Ever hear of a bribe?
The landlord.
Money buys everything. Well, I saved myself $300 tonight, the bonus you didn't earn.
Yeah? Well, we found out one thing I don't think you knew. Prentice already has a wife.
How'd you find that out?
Murphy, my associate. She's been calling some of the phone numbers Prentice calls on a daily basis. New York, Washington, D.C., Maryland.
What's that in your hand?
Phone numbers. He had a bunch of them written down in his folder on you.
Give them here. You're off the case.
Oh, just like that?
Just like that. Hand me the paper.
Both of you, stay where you are. Get the lights, Marietta.
Harry Nile will return in a minute.
You must be confused, Mr. Nile. This isn't my office. It's where I live.
Yeah, you can put the gun down, Prentice. I'm not armed.
You'd better check Dad. He's capable of a lot of rotten
This
things.
is an outrage. I don't even carry guns.
No, Marietta, he steals in a different way. I hardly think he'd add homicide to his crimes.
What are you talking about?
Crimes?
If you idiots would stop talking for a minute, I can clear all this up. Marietta, my dear, whatever you may think of me, I've been trying to protect you from this con artist.
Just like you protected me from my first 2 marriages.
Yes, and I intend to prevent another tragic mistake.
George Prentice already has a wife in Maryland. Did you know that, Miss Burnside?
I not only know he has a wife, we've become friends.
What?
And I'll trade you another little surprise. Do you know who George Prentice really is?
Yes, a fortune hunter.
No, I happen to work for the Securities and Exchange Commission as a federal investigator.
What? The SEC?
That's right. The publishing house was just a front.
Marietta, what are you trying to do to me?
You were getting too close, Mr. Nile. When our people in Washington and New York told me your office had called, I knew you'd figure out who I was and what I was doing out here, so I decided to cut the sham.
You didn't answer me, Marietta. What are you trying to do to me?
It's called payback. Payback for what you did to Mother.
Your mother's a sick woman. It's costing me a fortune to keep her in that sanitarium.
Payback for trying to live my life for me.
Who did I have left? You're the only Burnside left.
I think it's time we went downtown. There's a warrant for your arrest awaiting you at the federal courthouse in Seattle, Mr. Burnside.
I'm calling my attorneys.
Well, that's your privilege. Now let's go.
One thing, Burnside, did you really think Prentice was a con man after your money? Or did you know he was a federal officer? I just want to know how badly I was used.
I'm not saying another word without my lawyers at my side.
I guess you'll have to settle for that, Mr. Nile. Oh, and I'll overlook the breaking and entering. You will be available to testify for a grand jury, I'm sure.
I paid you $100 a day, and now you're turning on me.
I'm refunding all your money tomorrow, Mr. Burnside. Just as soon as the bank opens.
Harry and the Homework featured Phil Harper as Harry and Pat French as Murphy, with Tony Karloff, Randall Kirby, and Catherine Odegaard. The program was written and produced by Jim French and directed by Pat French, with sound effects by Sean O'Meara and Ben Peterson, dialogue mixing by Peggy Stokes, and was recorded before a live audience in Seattle. This is Jay Green speaking.